I will confess that I am a bit of a ringer. In other words, it is my job to to use marketing and specifically copywriting to raise money. Now, I do not usually do this for nonprofit organizations. I'm raising money for products and services. But many of the same principles apply, and there is one key thing. I remember last year someone came up to me at the walk and said, "You guys are the Bipolar Express?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I thought there would be like 70 of you. How did you guys do this?" And I will tell you, it is by the power of telling a story. We are all hardwired to listen to stories. From the second we're born to hearing Once Upon a Time to cavemen who sat around a fireplace, right? We are hardwired to listen to stories. And there are lots and lots of ways that you can use stories to raise money for NAMI, even if it is not your story, even if it is not the story of your child, even if you have to keep confidentiality. And so I'm going to just give you a few that I literally just whipped off the top of my head this morning as ideas to get you started. And the first thing that you've got coming around is the story that I used last year, because someone at the walk had said to me, after she found out how much money we raised, she was like, "Good God, I need to see that post. What was that?" Right? So this is part of the magic, and you are welcome to use any, all, or part of this. You know, change it to your name, change it to your story. Any part of this is yours to use. And you'll notice I started with a very simple story that was not mine. I watched a 60 Minutes episode, maybe many of you saw this, with the senator whose son died of mental illness, of suicide, and of course, now I'm having a senior moment, I can't remember his name. I can vividly see his face with that huge scar talking about how he had tried and tried to get his son into the hospital and had been sent back home, and within 8 hours, his son was in the midst of an episode and had attacked him. And he's telling this story, and my heart is just breaking, and I'm watching this. And then they cut to this interview of like a group of moms, and they're talking to them about their children with mental illness, and they say to this one mom, to the group, you know, well, what's the difference between a child who has, you know, some other kind of terminal or life-threatening disease and mental illness? And this woman says, casseroles, casseroles. Nobody brings you casseroles when your son's in the psych ward. Nobody comes and sits with you. Nobody puts you on the prayer list. Nobody stops by your house and cooks dinner for your other kids, right? And she tells the story of she has 2 children, one of whom was in some kind of car accident, and the other one has mental illness. And the way her community reacted to the 2 children who were in the hospital at different times was night and day, right? So I just use that. I use that as a story opening, very simple. I say, I remember watching an interview on 60 Minutes with a mother whose son suffers from schizophrenia. When the reporter asked her, what's the difference between having a child with mental illness and having a child with any other life-threatening illness, she looked at him and said, casseroles. That's a really simple story. Anyone can use that story. In fact, you can. You can take and use that verbatim, right? You might want to watch the 60 Minutes clip, but you can use that verbatim, okay? And then you see how then in the second chapter, I mean the second paragraph, I say what I just said to you. You know, when your son has mental illness, nobody's bringing you casseroles. You're not on the church prayer list. Nobody's talking about it. And then you do what I call the turn. So you're just using the story kind of like people use a shiny object, right? Like, pay attention to me and get emotionally engaged with me, because that's what stories do, right? So now that I've got your attention and I've gotten you engaged, I'll take my glasses off here. Now you can do the turn. And for me, it's really simple. I just said, but NAMI is trying to change all that. They are like the proverbial port in the storm. And then I go on to tell our story of how NAMI has touched my life, which you may or may not have to do. You could put that in third person. You could say, NAMI is the port in the storm. They reach out. When anyone suffers from mental illness, they're there with classes, with programs, okay? And then I just go on to the ask at the end, and I say, so on Saturday, May 9th, our entire family, my siblings, my parents, our children and friends will walk to help raise much-needed funds for NAMI, and we would be grateful if you would join us by donating here. That is a really simple structure. So now, real quickly, I'm going to give you a few more that just came to me this morning looking in the media. I mean, the good news is we are starting this conversation about mental illness. We are starting to break the silence. In fact, another great source of stories is a friend of mine who is a writer told me that the magazine, I think it's called Creative Nonfiction, their theme for the entire year is breaking the silence on mental illness, and those are all the stories that they're publishing. And you can find them online, right? So there's even more stories for you. So this is me driving here while dictating into my phone, which is always dangerous. So I want to show you how it doesn't even have to be a story about mental illness. And we're going to do this real quick, and again, since my mother's the only, not quite the oldest, but close to, she may be my victim here. How many people in this room remember where they were when Kennedy was shot? Ooh, we have a good showing. Okay. So, Mom, can you come up here for a second? I'm going to pick on my mom. Forget the knee surgery. Okay, so tell me where you were when Kennedy was shot.
I was a junior in college. I came out of class. Someone said to me, the president's been shot. I said, but he's not dead. And they said, yes, he is. And from then, the classes were canceled. We sat around the television in the lounges of the dorm and for 3 days watched the news.
So you may be thinking, what on earth does knowing where you were when Kennedy was shot have to do with raising money for mental illness? Okay, so here's how my sick and twisted brain works, and here's how if you're looking for stories, you can always connect, all right? How many people have seen this issue of the NAMI Advocate? Okay? On the cover is Patrick Kennedy, okay? And it's about his book that he's written, and it's a wonderful article about how he is trying to change the way how the U.S. views mental illness and addiction, okay? So you can do a story like this. You can say, everybody remembers where they were when Kennedy was shot. I remember I was sitting in my college classroom when someone opened the door and stuck their head in and said, the president has been shot. I remember sitting for days in the student lounge watching the news coverage on TV. That was the golden age of Camelot, when many of us were filled with hope for a new future for our country. And today, another Kennedy has filled me with hope. Hope for a better future for the mentally ill in this country. He is Patrick Kennedy, the son of Senator Ted Kennedy, and he has risked the shame and ostracism of his family and peers to speak out about his own challenges with mental illness and addiction. His face is plastered all over the most recent issue of the National Alliance on Mental Illness newsletter. And then you transition to asking. Do you see how simple that was? Like, you know, I'm using a story that everybody connects to, right? Everyone has a story about that and connecting it to him. And I'm happy, I'll have Jennifer send that to you if that strikes a chord and some of you think that you can use that one, okay? Here's another one I came up with this morning. I will admit that I used to walk past homeless people begging in the street and avert my eyes. They made me nervous and uncomfortable. Now I am more likely to stop, walk into Panera, and buy them a coffee and a sandwich. That's because my family has experienced the ravages of mental illness and addiction firsthand. I no longer see some crazy homeless person begging for food. I see another mother's son. And I see the massive need for services and support for families that are dealing with this tragic illness. Boom, you're right into it. Do you not think that lots of people could identify with the story of walking past a homeless person because it's awkward and embarrassing and they avert their eyes? So you've got them right there. Here's one that was inspired by this lovely, lovely doe-eyed social worker who worked with my son when he first got into Talbert House SAMI program. She's just delightful. And so without revealing her name, I was like, well, how can I turn this around? Because what happened was when my son got there, one of his classmates was a social worker now and was assigned to his case. And then he ended up going, that was awkward for both of them, and he ended up working with this woman who was delightful, and she was only 2 years older than him. And for him, I just remember it was this moment where he realized the difference between his life trajectory and theirs. And so I thought, if you were a social worker, for those of you in the mental health care system, there's ways you can do your stories that don't reveal patient confidentiality. So I just made this one up, right? Thinking of that experience of my son. So you could write, I will never forget Jada. She was my first client. I was a fresh-faced, idealistic 23-year-old social worker right out of college. And Jada was just a few years older than me. And she too had been a promising, bright young student until she was diagnosed with bipolar disease her freshman year of college. The truth is, Jada taught me more about what it was like to live with mental illness than all the textbooks I had ever read. And it's because of her and all the clients since then that I am walking to raise money for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Didn't break confidentiality, didn't go anywhere near HIPAA, okay? And yet, do you see how that is more gripping than, do you know that 1 in 5 people suffer from mental illness and I would like you to give to NAMI? Do you see how you get engaged in a different place? It's not here, it's here, right? And I will give you one last one, which is another magazine. How many people, true confessions, how many people read Oprah magazine? Oh, come on. Okay, so Oprah, the cover of Oprah this month is, "You are not alone. We are starting a conversation about anxiety, depression, help, and hope." Lord knows when it's on the cover of Oprah, we are having a conversation, right? So I just thought, surely somebody here can use this magazine, right? So again, I made this up, right? Growing up, my nanny used to watch Oprah every day, the same way some people go to church on Sundays. As far as my nanny was concerned, Oprah was God. Nothing got in the way of her show. This was long before TiVo and digital recording, and so everything stopped when Oprah came on, and woe to the child who interrupted her when she was watching her show. So when I saw the cover of the latest Oprah magazine that said, "We are starting a conversation about anxiety and depression, help and hope, you are not alone," I knew my nanny would be pleased. She struggled with depression all her life in a time when people did not speak about these things. You just buckled down and soldiered on, and you didn't whine or complain. Everyone had their cross to bear. And now, thanks to Oprah and organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, we are finally talking about it. So I challenge you, look around you. There are stories everywhere. There are stories everywhere. It can be your story, it can be their story, it can be a completely random, disconnected story, like where you were when Kennedy was shot, and then you tie it to it. And I will send these little random notes out to you. Again, if anything in here is workable, take it, use it, think in your mind, brainstorm with each other. But I will tell you that if you can start with a story, you are much more likely, studies show, you are much more likely to get a response, a donation, than just reciting facts. Make the facts human and real to people. Okay.